So there's economics, that fairly undefined discipline with differing opinions about what's right and what's wrong, pretty much driven by politics as much as it is by mathematics, with theories that bounce around wildly depending on who's offering them. Then there's real science, physics, chemistry, biology, all the stuff we did at school, and in amongst all of that, thermodynamics, that bit of science that deals with heat and energy. Pretty fundamental, right? And surely energy is at the heart of economics. So how did so many economists miss it out? And that waste that consuming energy creates. So what can we learn from thermodynamics? And what part should it play in economics? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. So, Steve, the idea that economics should embrace thermodynamics has been around for a while, hasn't it? So there was a Romanian economist, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen, who wrote the Entropy Law and the Economic Process in 1971. It was about the same time that we saw the Club of Rome releasing Limits to Growth, wasn't it? So it's been the first point in all of this, when you say that we need, there needs to be more of an acceptance of it, we've been saying that for decades now.
And economics has gone backwards on that front at the same time, which is quite appalling. And that's one reason why I got into working on ecological economics to begin with, because how pathetic economics has been on this whole front. It has continued to ignore the laws of thermodynamics, and therefore you get nonsense like economists believing you can produce output using labour and capital alone. Totally a disembodied view of how production occurs in the economy, which is one reason they can't understand climate change. And when they come at it, they think they're being wisdom, and it's pathetic.
So let's take a step back then. What are the laws of thermodynamics? And then let's look at how they can be applied.
Well, I've got to say, first of all, I am an
economist.
Unfortunately, I'm an amateur on thermodynamics. I've got to say that right from the outset. And thermodynamics is also one of those things that I've forgotten who said this about quantum mechanics, but if somebody said, if you think I understand quantum mechanics, that shows that you don't. Okay, so it's one of those very, very hairy areas. But the basic idea is, first of all, the amount of energy in the universe is a given. The first law of thermodynamics is energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So there's a set amount of energy, and that's it. And this is one of these, again, things which has come out of largely out of observation to a large degree. The laws were worked out in an observational sense to begin with in the 19th century. But one of the first things people realized was you cannot make energy. And the classic statement of this is there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. So you can't have something which takes X amount of energy in and gives 2X amounts of energy out. Does not happen. You can take energy in, you can use it to do work, and that will then transform the energy, but it will not change the absolute quantity. So that's what's called the zeroth law. There's no the amount of energy that exists is what you've got to use. You can't create it. That's the fixed amount.
At any point in time, though, because there's energy storage, isn't there? So when I burn oil to fuel my car, then I'm getting energy to make my car move. I guess there was energy created to produce that oil, but.
Well, maybe you've got, if you think about your car and burning the oil, you've got potential energy inside the oil. It becomes, to actually make your car work, you're converting that chemical potential energy into actual kinetic energy. But to do that, you are also, if you particularly think about an engine as a heat engine, and this is where a lot of the insights in thermodynamics came from, what if the motive force that's causing you to go forward is simply heat flowing from one point to another? So you have a hot reservoir and a cold reservoir, and between the two you have a wheel. And if you connect the two reservoirs through the wheel, then the heat will flow from the hot to the cold, and as it does so, it will cause the wheel to spin, and the wheel to spin makes your car go forward. Now that's the fundamental frame. It's called a Carnot. I don't know how to pronounce it, so it's French. I'm bound to be pronouncing it badly, but the Carnot heat engine was one of the original concepts in working out the laws of thermodynamics. And an essential part of that is you can't do work using energy without creating waste. And that's the curliest of the laws. That's the second law of thermodynamics, that there's, if you're going to...
which is what the word entropy, which is...
That's the word entropy, yeah. And look, it's a whole lot of...
It basically means to disorder or waste.
Disorderise it.
Yeah.
So if a system is... the example I used to use in lectures quite regularly, and it seems to get through, is imagine that you take all the air inside a lecture theatre and you squeeze it into 1 cubic centimetre of space. So you've got 10,000 cubic meters of lecture space, and you've got all the air is squared into 1 cubic centimeter. Now, you want to compare that to then you open up the cubic centimeter, and all the air rushes out into the room. Which of those two states has more order?
I'd say when it was all condensed, because it's got to be in order to fit in.
Yeah, it is. So
and then when you go out, you just go all over the place when you release it.
That's right. So that's the basic idea, the idea of the number of states in which it's feasible that all the molecules of air in the room spontaneously end up in 1 cubic centimetre is outrageously low likelihood of happening. And that's what's called a situation, and I always get this wrong. I've got to check it each time I bloody well do it. Low entropy. Okay, you have a very low. Hang on, I better check that.
So low entropy means there's a great deal of order.
A great deal of order. High entropy means disorder.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and what that means is, if you think about, let's say there's a billion molecules, and that's probably an underestimate of the number of oxygen molecules in a lecture theatre. Then if you distribute it randomly throughout the lecture theatre, if you swap one oxygen molecule from one side of the lecture theatre to the other, you make absolutely no difference in the equilibrium situation for the entire room. So there's many ways of organising those molecules and still having the same overall distribution of molecules in the room itself. That's high disorder. That's high entropy. Now, when you have a highly organised state, it's low entropy. Now, you think about what is, and that's the overall framework. And we're talking about objects that don't have any sense of purpose to them. Oxygen molecules in a room. What about when you then try to apply that to production? What's going on in production? Well, production appears to go in the opposite direction, and that is we're taking in a whole range of things which, even though like iron ore is more organised than just soil, iron ore is less organised than steel. So you're taking high entropy, disordered stuff, putting it through an energy processing process, a bit of blast furnace, you've got to have heat coming in to do that, and you turn it into slag on the one hand and iron on the other, and you've actually, what we look at, we throw the slag away and forget about it, and we focus upon the iron alone, and the iron is more ordered than the iron ore was beforehand, and all the other elements to make it. Right. So going from low entropy to high entropy, if I've got that right, going from a disorganized state to a more organized state, we still end up with the same amount of energy, but it's in a more concentrated way, and we've got the waste at the same time. We've got waste, and this is the point, that you can't produce anything without waste. Okay, there's actually a lovely summary of these laws by the old poet Allen Ginsberg, and when I first thought that's brilliant, who first wrote it, and turns out it was Allen Ginsberg. He says the laws of thermodynamics are the following. First law, the zeroth law, is you can't win. Okay, you're in a game. Law 0, you can't win. The second law, the second law is that you can't break even. Okay, so you're going to lose. And the final law is you can't leave the game. So what does that all? So the first thing, no energy is created. There's no net gain that come out of it. That's the zeroth law. That the amount of energy is a constant. The first law, I'm going to jump over that to some extent. It's basically talking about uniformity, but it's the absence of capacity to create and uniformity in the system under thermodynamic equilibrium. But the second law is you can't break even. It means that if you're going to do work, you're going to necessarily waste some of the energy you use. And the basic idea there is that, taking back to the heat engine idea, if you have a hot reservoir and a cold reservoir, and you join the two together, then the first law of thermodynamics is going to mean that the hot reservoir, which is going to have molecules moving very quickly, will, just by the random bouncing of molecules off each other, will move towards the cold, and you'll get a uniform temperature between the hot and the cold unless you continue adding more heat to the hot reservoir. Now that motion will then go through the wheel, and that will turn the wheel and enable you to do work. So if you imagine the wheel is first of all blocking the two, you've got the brake on, and it won't let the hot air flow to the cold reservoir. Then you take the brake off, and that lets the wheel spin. That's doing work. But then the work stops when the temperature of the hot and cold reservoirs becomes the same. Now, the only way to do that at 100% efficiency, convert all the heat energy into work, is to be able to dump that waste energy in a location which is at 0 degrees. And I don't actually know which is at zero. I should be saying 0 degrees. Zero, as in zero, absolute zero Kelvin, 0 Kelvin. And the third law of thermodynamics is there is no place at absolute zero.
So in short, there is no work without waste. If you want to hear this podcast in full, all 40 minutes of it, you need to become a subscriber at debunkingeconomics.com or become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof. Steve Keen and support Steve's work there and get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. That's it for this week. Back again with another one next week. Thanks for listening.